Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video, I want to discuss my expectations for the upcoming movie Solo: A Star Wars Story, which is going to be coming out roughly a week from this recording. Now, the movie Solo: A Star Wars Story is the second spin-off movie, or Star Wars story, following Rogue One, which has come out since Disney has basically relaunched the Star Wars brand under their own banner, and this is going to be a prequel which takes place even before Episode 4. A New Hope, the original Star Wars movie, and I believe after Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So during that period of time between the two trilogies. And of course, far before the current trilogy that we're in right now. But with that being said, Solo: A Star Wars Story is coming out after Episode 8, The Last Jedi. And as a result of seeing The Last Jedi and my opinions on it, which I've discussed in my review, which I discussed in my top 10 most disappointing movies of 2017, which you can check out on my channel, I'm not exactly enthusiastic going into Solo: A Star Wars Story, especially given so many of the issues that we've heard about during the production, and now some of the early reviews coming out. So I want to get into my expectations. So going into Solo, it is really interesting how I feel, because the way that I feel right now, with my level of expectations, with my level of interest in the movie, and with my level of anticipation, the closest I've really felt to this was when I went into the prequel trilogy, more specifically when I went into Episode 2 and especially Episode 3, where basically I had zero interest going in. I was kind of done with the movies at that point just because of how bad the Episode 1 and Episode 2 were. You know, around that period of time, around the third one, I had, I guess, kind of realized more and more just how weak these movies were, you know, and I was becoming less and less excited, to where when I went into Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, I didn't go in to see a movie that was like a good Star Wars movie or a movie that was just good in general. I basically went in just to finally see what the entire prequel trilogy had been, and that was how the Empire was made, and very specifically how Darth Vader ended up within that Darth Vader suit, the black suit, and of course how he had received all of those horrible injuries which caused him to go into that essential life support suit. So very similarly to with those movies, I'm going into Solo with very little anticipation for the movie. I mean, after all, this is a movie that so many times people have referred to as the movie nobody asked for, because let's be honest, who really wants to see a young Han Solo movie that's not actually starring Harrison Ford, the one who has played Han Solo for these past 3+ decades now, the one who originally appeared in A New Hope? And when you think about it, you know, this is the idea of this movie, is that it's supposed to be an origin story for Han Solo. It's supposed to be showing him going from this one person to this person that we met in the original trilogy. But the problem with that is that the original trilogy was also the Han Solo origin. Episode 4, just like with Luke, just like with Obi-Wan, just like with all these characters, was the real origin of the character, you know? Like when we see Han Solo in A New Hope, he's basically at the beginning of his arc, you know? He's this rogue, he's somebody who is kind of on the run from Jabba the Hutt, you know, he has to kill Greedo just so that he doesn't get killed himself, and he really is kind of abandoning people. He's not really interested in helping out the Rebel Alliance, and we even see that later in the movie as everyone's setting up the trench run of the Death Star, and Han Solo's like, okay, I got my reward, I'm out of here. Hey Luke, why don't you come with me? And Luke is like, you know what's gonna happen here, you should really stay here and help. And he then eventually shows up at the end and does in fact help. So that was already kind of his arc to begin with. So going into this movie, you know, like, why do I want to see something else that came before that? Like, how is that going to truly be significant to the character, other than just showing us things that we already knew happened in the past, but actually showing them this time? It's very akin to some other stuff that happened in A New Hope, like when Obi-Wan is basically dumping the exposition about everything that happened before Episode 4 or the original Star Wars movie. Oh, I fought with your father in the Clone Wars, Luke. Oh, your father was a great pilot. All of that stuff, just mentioning it to Luke and, of course, to the audience, so the audience can understand Anakin Skywalker's character before he fell, you know, if at that point in time time that's kind of what they were actually doing, which some things kind of point against. But either way, you know, like, we didn't really need to see those things in the prequels, but in the prequels they also made sure to show some other things as well when we actually did get to them. However, the thing is with this, it's basically just going to be Solo. I'm sure it's going to tie him to the Rebels, which I kind of hope it doesn't when you think about it, because again, if he already was working with the Rebels and helping them out, you know, then suddenly we get to episode 4 when he's like, oh, I don't want to help the Rebels at all. I'm just this selfish guy who's not going to team up with them. That would be kind of odd when you think about it. It would be kind of contradictory, which I know Star Wars prequels, you know, don't really have a problem with contradicting lore. But then again, the sequels don't either, especially episode 8. But when it comes to the story of Solo, you know, I'm not really expecting it to be very good. I'm not expecting it to be something that's different. I'm not expecting it to be something that, you know, fans are going to be shocked by this happening or that happening. It's probably going to be incredibly predictable, and I wouldn't be surprised if it plays out like that video that Red Letter Media did, in which, you know, basically we get all these various story beats that, you know, reference things we already know, like Han Solo meets Chewbacca, Han Solo meets Lando Calrissian, we find the Millennium Falcon, you know, maybe we'll get a cameo from C-3PO or the pig guy from episode 4 who was also in Rogue One. You know, maybe he won't show up in this one because he was in that movie. I kind of wonder how he escaped from Jeddah when they blew the city up with the Death Star. That's neither here nor there. I'm sure they'll do a whole book about that and then detail all of the various systems that he has the death penalty on. But when it comes to Solo, you know, going into this, I'm kind of expecting something that's going to be passable, something that's going to be kind of just like there. You know, it's going to be even more esoteric than Rogue One because, you know, Rogue One, basically the entire movie, and I've said this in other videos, has been summed up in the opening crawl of episode 4. You know, it's entirely esoteric insofar as we don't really need to see it. And actually, when you do see Rogue One, sure, it kind of puts a face on the people who sacrifice themselves. I guess it gives the battle against the Death Star and the Death Star itself some more dramatic weight, but at the same time, it's not like Rogue One really went out of its way to truly develop all these characters, give them a great personality that we can gravitate to, show us their motivations. I mean, those people were basically just there. And with Han Solo, I guess that they could show us certain things that we haven't even heard about in the movies. You know, maybe they can pull from Legends continuity, maybe they can reference certain books that they've already done in the canon continuity, and we can get more in depth into what really drove Han Solo as a young man before we even meet him, maybe why he is the way that he is in A New Hope. But all of it really, again, feels like something that isn't entirely necessary to exist. Now, not all movies have to be necessary, of course. Not all movies have to be something that really is required to exist for the fan base to truly get a character or to understand. It really comes down to execution. And when it comes to the director, Ron Howard, he has made some great movies in the past, like Apollo 11, for example. I thought Rush was really good with Chris Hemsworth as a more recent movie, although his next Chris Hemsworth movie, In the Heart of the Sea, I thought was kind of boring and wasn't really the best movie, so I'm kind of hoping that Solo doesn't follow in that vein as opposed to many of his classics. But one of the biggest problems, though, is that Ron Howard wasn't the original director. The original directors were Lord and Miller, who did the Lego Movie, which, I mean, right off the bat, that sounded like a really bad idea, and I feel like Kathleen Kennedy, the executive producer behind all of this, behind Lucasfilm right now, maybe just brought them in because they were successful with that movie, but like, once she saw it, and once Lawrence Kasdan, I guess, saw what they were doing, then they just fired them, and they replaced them with Ron Howard. So it's like, why didn't you just bring in Ron Howard to begin with? You know, why did we go through all of this, unless, of course, you don't necessarily know what you're doing, or what these directors gonna go for? And of course, that ties back into The Last Jedi, where Kathleen Kennedy basically gave Rian Johnson carte blanche to do whatever he did, so he took the trilogy layout from J.J. Abrams and basically threw it in the trash and did whatever he wanted to do, which caused so much of the polarization in the fan base, and has kind of also led to me not being very interested in seeing this movie either. And that's one of the things, like, when it comes to the sequel trilogy, The Last Jedi and its effect on Star Wars, its effect on the fan base, and especially me as an individual fan of Star Wars, a lifelong fan who is someone who is usually usually excited to see these movies, someone who was very excited after Episode 7, which I think is the best Disney Star Wars movie that they've made so far, which is sad because it was the first one that they made. I was excited going into Rogue One, I was excited going into The Last Jedi, but it seems like with each film they've been getting worse and worse. And as opposed to a movie like Episode 7 that left me, you know, excited, The Last Jedi made me really kind of feel like when I'm going to the next Star Wars movie, be it Episode 9 or in this case, it made me feel like I'm going to a funeral of an old friend, you know, something that I basically just gotta get over with. I'm gonna be sad during it or kind of just desensitized because of what happened in the last movie. And so going into Solo, I guess that means that my expectations and my excitement for it is at a very low level. So for me, I really am kind of hoping that Solo will just be better or at least less infuriating to me as a fan than The Last Jedi, but there is a possibility it could be even worse, and it could follow the trend that these movies seem to be following, where each subsequent film just gets worse and worse. And of course, the stuff that surrounded the movie and the production definitely doesn't point to it being something that's going to be great. I mean, some people I already see are saying that the Solo movie saves Star Wars and Ron Howard saves Star Wars, you know, and we even see pictures of like George Lucas. I think he was visiting the set at some point. So, I mean, that does give long-term Star Wars fans like myself, I guess, a little bit more incentive or a little bit more interest, or I guess this film a little bit more credibility. But if the movie just ends up being like mediocre or boring or something that I don't particularly care about, then it's still not going to make me interested in or really caring for the next entry in Star Wars, you know? It's not going to really make me very interested in the Star Wars stories or these spin-offs, because it seems like all they keep doing with these movies is continue to focus them around like the 60s, 70 years that the prequels, the original trilogy, and the sequels, and just their interim basically took place during, you know? With Star Wars, we always hear from the books, and we hear from like just people saying in passing how there's been like 1,000 generations of the Republic, and how thousands and thousands of years of wars between the Sith and the Jedi have gone on, and so many other things. So it's like, can't you guys just show that? Do we really need a Han Solo movie? Do we need more and more stuff that takes place during such a small period of time in this one particular area of the galaxy with the same kind of characters, or just the same characters in general every single time? So I feel like maybe that's really going to come to a head with this movie. Now, on the other hand, there is the Obi-Wan movie, which is very likely to be made and to come out. You know, there's been rumors saying that it's already going to be heading into production soon, so that's something I'm interested in. But if the movie's literally just Obi-Wan sitting in the desert on Tatooine defending Luke Skywalker as a kid the entire movie, that's nowhere near as interesting to me as seeing maybe young Obi-Wan, and maybe like his relationship with Duchess Satine from Mandalore, and other things that have been hinted at in like the Clone Wars cartoon, and other things that we've heard about from Obi-Wan's past that we never got to see. And also, it'd be really cool to see Liam Neeson return as Qui-Gon Jinn, you know? Like, there's so many ways that they could explore that, but if, again, just like Solo, just like these movies that we continue to see, they focus on this one specific period of time rather than just branching out and really opening Star Wars up, then that's not really something I'm going to be super interested in either. So I guess to sum this video up, I'm not very excited to go into Solo: A Star Wars Story. I'm not really expecting much, and I just kind of hope it's going to be a more entertaining or enjoyable experience for me than The Last Jedi. But ultimately, I want a good Star Wars movie. I want something a little bit different, because everyone boasted about how The Last Jedi is the movie that changed everything. It was so bold, it was so different, but then you watch the movie and you rewatch it and you're just like, well, it's basically the exact same thing that we had in the original trilogy. You know, they just replaced the Empire with the First Order. You still got an evil guy who's the head of everything. You know, it's still the rebels and all this other stuff that we've already seen before. So I want to see something different, and hopefully Episode 9 will kind of salvage some of what this sequel trilogy has done to the Star Wars brand, and perhaps that trilogy from the Game of Thrones guys will focus on like the Old Republic or something like that, something more interesting that I really want to see as a longtime Star Wars fan. But when it comes to Solo, I just hope it's going to be, I guess, an entertaining 2 hours or whatever the length of the movie is going to be. So let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments section. What are your expectations for the Solo: A Star Wars Story movie? And are you excited for this movie? Are you excited for the future of Star Wars, or has The Last Jedi and what Disney has kind of done since they've taken over hurt your own appreciation and interest in the future of the franchise? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to share this video with your friends, subscribe to this channel, and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out. And if you like this video, then make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe, enable those damn notifications.